actually aren't any obstacles because it's part of the school curriculum. In middle school, especially 6th, 7th, 8th grade, students are required to learn about Chinese history, the history of India, the history of the Silk Road, for instance. And so all of those topics connect beautifully with, you know, the artworks in our collection. And so there actually isn't a barrier in terms of getting teachers interested. Deb, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree totally. And actually the harder challenge for us is the general public. So we seem to have unlimited, maybe it's too strong a word, but we could increase our school audiences if we invested more heavily in staffing for them. And if we had a bigger museum to be able to have the capacity to welcome 200 to 300 to 400 students a day, but we don't have that kind of footprint or that staff. So, but we have to turn teachers away. But I think the harder challenge for us is so many of the artworks in our galleries are not all that familiar to the average person. And so it's maybe more challenging to attract adult visitors or increase the number of adult visitors who are coming, whereas we have probably held down the attendance for school groups.
We collaborate, school programs collaborates a lot with the family and youth programs. So my colleague Triana leads the Art Speak interns, and the Art Speak interns help create the activities for Family Fun Day, which is our free Sunday event. The first free Sunday of the month is always Family Fun Day. And so we often collaborate and help each other to come up with ideas for activities. And often her interns come and support our teacher workshops. They're speakers sometimes, because teachers also like to hear from students, right? Students are very honest, bluntly honest about what adults should do to, you know, make the world better. And a couple years ago, when we, right as we were coming out of the pandemic, our first workshop back at the museum was about an exhibit called After Hope, which was a series of videos just reflecting on all the different conflicts in the world. And our Art Speak interns came to speak at that, you know, to talk about hope, what hope means to them as young people. And then they also taught teachers about how to make a zine, you know, which is a popular way for kids to express themselves, to write about and illustrate their thoughts about what's happening in the world. So there is a lot of collaboration in terms of school programs and public programs. Deb, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. And I think we feel like if an exhibition or an activity or an experience is resonating and successful with kids, whether they be part of a school group or with a family, that's good for everybody, because there are always adult visitors who are maybe like to reconnect with that side of them that maybe is more childlike. So I think museums could benefit, like ours, could benefit from being a little bit more playful or a little bit more play-centered. And I think that's one of the ways. I didn't really use that language in the talk, but I think that's definitely one of the ways that I think about what art museums could do more of, is to offer more play opportunities, to have hands-on experiences, to make something, to create something, to laugh, to talk, to just to interact in a different way. I think with family groups, your goal with family groups might be a little bit different than your goal with a school group. So the goal with a family group is you want to see that intergenerational collaboration. You don't want to just be childcare while the parents go off and do something by themselves. So the goal of that activity is to generate something that they can do together. And it's not so much that the parent is there having to help the child, but that there's some collaboration where they're on equal footing. And I think school programs can actually generate audiences for family programs, because every child who comes to one of our school programs gets a free family pass. And then they hopefully feel empowered to bring their family back as the sort of the official guide, if you will. So I think that they are very interconnected, but they are slightly different motivations. So a student who comes as part of a school group, maybe they didn't choose to come to the museum. It was up to their teacher to make that choice, to bring them. They maybe didn't even know where they were going exactly. Whereas in a family dynamic, perhaps the student was the one who was the decider to suggest the visit to the museum. But I do think that as Margaret was saying earlier, that we're constantly trading ideas back and forth between the staff who develop the programs for families that tend to be more drop-in, a little bit more self-directed, not reliant always on an educator being present or a trained docent or storyteller. But then also having activities that may also relate well to a school tour. So, and we share the same volunteers too. Our storytellers are very active in our school program, and they're also at every family fun day. But the family fun day, the storyteller has to be, it's almost like we have to be ready for a different dynamic. So the storyteller has to be ready for there to be grandparents, adults, and babes in arms, and toddlers, and maybe even tweenagers and teenagers. So the age range can be very broad and very diverse. And maybe even younger than we normally would have. So it's maybe more challenging for the volunteer for a drop-in family tour versus a school group that they know this is second and third graders. And so they kind of know who their audience is going to be. So it just requires that you have to be a little bit more quick on your feet or light on your feet and kind of assess the audience that you have in the moment, which is very challenging. Have such an amazing, diverse group of people working at the museum. So diversity in terms of educational background. We have some people who have art degrees, art, studio art. We have people with art history degrees. We have Margaret, I think, has a degree in English literature. We have people who have museum studies degrees. And let's think, am I leaving anything out? Mostly in the liberal arts. And then many people have, come from an Asian background, maybe a third of our staff or so. We have staff whose heritage is Filipino, Chinese, Indian, and am I forgetting anyone, Margaret? I guess that's the makeup right now of the department. In terms of our volunteer, and of course they're all different ages. I'm the oldest person in the team, and we have people on the team who are probably in their late 20s, I would guess, is probably the youngest. So of our volunteers, so we've been talking about docents and storytellers, they're all volunteers, and they're mostly retired people, so they're mostly older folks. Many of them have lived in Asia or come from families who are from Asia. They either immigrated themselves or are first or second generation or more, third generation Asian American, or just a lot of white Americans who have a passion for Asian art. And they tend to be aged maybe 40s to, I'm sure we have some in their 80s.
Wow.
And some of them have been involved with the museum for longer than I've worked at the museum, which is, a long time, 2 decades or more.
Does Margaret has anything to add about the specialty?
Of our education staff? I think more important than knowing a lot of art history content is actually knowing how to relate to kids. I think that's, and that's why I thought maybe adding at the end that you need a more diverse museum education team. it's not just looking for people who've already been at museums or worked at museums. It could be people from other fields, but who have a good sense of how to work with kids. That's the most important thing, I think. So you don't have to look for people with a museum education degree or an art history degree. If, you know, one of my educators studied sociology and gender studies and worked with students as a camp counselor, is great with kids, didn't know any Asian art history before she joined our team. Now she knows a lot, you know, from the 3 years that she's been working with us and learning, you know, the tours and working with the docents and storytellers. But the key was that she worked well with kids and knew kids, how they think, what they need, versus having a lot of art history background.
Well, I was just going to answer in general. It's definitely a area that we'd like to develop more fully. We've been doing a little bit more access programming for public programs. We have some great partners in the Bay Area, and I think Margaret will talk about some of the school partnerships as well. But so we've been doing a lot of audio descriptions, and we've been trying to do more tactile experiences. In fact, we've been partnering with an inventor, I guess is maybe what do you call, or sort of an entrepreneur based in Hong Kong, who develops tactile experiences for vision impaired audiences to have art experiences. Rico Chan is his name, and he's the pandemic interrupted a project that we were developing together, so we hope to pick that up again. But the idea is to have a tactile replica of a work of art that is also connected to an audio experience, so that you direct the audio based on where your hands are on the tactile experience. For students, I think we've just been really trying to develop them as we have the connections with teachers who have special needs students. So, but sometimes a lot of our classrooms are blended. So maybe Margaret, you can talk a little bit about that challenge.
Yeah, often it's not a class of all students who have special needs. It's often kids who are integrated into the class, and we want to make it so by serving them, we're serving everyone. And so using those slides that have the vocabulary words, for instance, you know, to help students who might have slower processing, that doesn't just help the kids with special needs, that helps the whole class reinforce their vocabulary or learn a new word or remember something better, right? By seeing it, not just hearing it. And so we're trying to increase our use of the iPads and the use of other modes of learning, not just the visual, right? By playing more music using the iPads, showing, you know, more videos, doing more kinesthetic activities. And I mentioned that on our teacher advisory council, we do have 2 teachers who work with students with disabilities, and they've been fantastic in giving us feedback in terms of slowing down, doing less, and in some cases, you know, letting the kids just explore instead of having your created tour already, you know, to deliver. Just be open to what the kids want to look at and go there. And that way your content isn't preventing the students from having a good experience or getting a really great, rich experience at the museum. Often our content is the barrier, right? There's so much information. There's so many words, you know, that might not be familiar, which is that are complicated. Instead, letting the kids just explore, giving them quiet time. We've heard from some teachers with kids with special needs, you know, if a kid doesn't seem like they're paying attention, it's not that they're not paying attention, it's that they're processing. Slow down, give kids more response time. You know, don't expect them to answer right away. Maybe they just need a little more time to gather their thoughts. And if they need some time away, some quiet time, give them that time to explore because they need it instead of you forcing your content onto them. So I think, I don't know if that's necessarily addressing certain special needs. It's just the more general philosophy that by serving the kids with the most needs, you're actually serving everyone.
certainly there's a lot of discussion in education circles here, and Margaret can speak more to this, about the gaps in development that we are seeing with young people because of social distancing and being, separated at a time when you really need to be around people for your development, for developing social skills. So I think that's part of it. If certain age groups really were negatively impacted by the pandemic, they don't know how to interact with other people because they haven't had those formative experiences. There's also in our country that you probably hear about in the news, a little breakdown of civility. We see it in adults as well as with children. So it's easy to blame the pandemic, but maybe any other stressor could have brought these characteristics out, this kind of frustration or pent up anxiety that people are feeling. And I do think that people look to museums to be spaces of healing and a place for respite, or a place to recover, or a place to feel better, or a place to kind of get away from the stressors and anxieties of the world. So really insightful question. Margaret, do you want to add anything about particularly, development of students and what you're seeing in school groups?
Yeah, I think being home isolated during the lockdown had a really drastic effect, and teachers have seen it, especially at those transition years, like when a child is in between elementary school and 6th grade. If they miss that transition, they really struggle if they're back at school at a later year. So for instance, they missed the transition to middle school, which is 6th grade here, but they went back to school in 7th or 8th grade. They lost a lot because that transition year of 6th grade was when they learned, how to go from class to class, how to use a locker, how to, change subjects. Whereas before in elementary school, they were all in the same classroom the whole day. In middle school, they go to different classrooms for each subject. And so missing out on that routine, on learning the routine, having that structure and how to navigate the new space of the school, made it so when they got to school back in session on campus in 7th or 8th grade, they had really lost a lot. And it was hard for them to gain back that ability to follow a structure or to follow rules or to be in a community with others. So I think, yes, we might have had learning loss, academic learning loss over the last 2 years, but what teachers are really worried about is the social emotional learning loss from the last 2 years. That kids who are now in 11th grade are really emotionally more like 8th or 9th graders because they didn't get the practice of being with other people and maturing in that way.
Well, Margaret go ahead, Margaret.
Yeah, I was going to give the Bodhisattva, the Guanyin example again, where, that's in our collection. And at first the kids might wonder, why does she have so many arms? And once they learn the story, it's because she wants to help as many people as possible. There's something very moving about that. But besides knowing that, now they have to think, how can I help as many people as possible? What are all the different acts of kindness I can think of? Let me just add one, to put in one of her hands. Let me learn from all the other acts of kindness that my friends just put up. So that's one example. Not in terms of our permanent collection, but with every exhibition, as you saw, Deb showed the example of the weaving of, the stories about people's garments into a response wall. We're now trying to incorporate more and more response walls so that, again, people can reflect and make a connection to their own lives, but always in a positive way. And so Carlos Villa, the artist that I showed, made those cloaks that the kids were imitating in their paper cloaks. During his exhibition, we had a question up on the wall because he was such an important teacher to so many younger artists. We asked, well, who's an important mentor in your life? Who's an important teacher or coach or just someone who's given you a lot of support as you've grown up? And that wall got covered with answers from people. I can just show a quick image. Let's see. So this is the wall, and this is early in the exhibition. People were covering the wall with notes about these important people in their lives. And this wasn't just to show gratefulness. This was the way for them to think to themselves, well, when I get to a difficult moment in my life, can I think back, to someone who was there for me? Or can I think back to the advice that person gave me? Or can I just remember that person so I know I'm not alone, that person cared for me, at a tough time? And so we have all these notes that are just these passionate celebrations of teachers and mentors, parents, grandparents, siblings. I want to show actually a really nice one. Oops. Remember Jennifer Wofford, the artist who did the pattern recognition workshop for us? We found this on the wall. To Wofford, my mentor, professor, and friend, thanking you doesn't encompass all I want to say, but it will suffice for this note. So thank you for introducing me to Carlos Villa, for being my educator, for your Filipino American arts course, for the opportunities to work with you, for pushing me to be better, for your presence. It just kept going. My experience at today's exhibit was more intimate than I expected it to be, but it made me grateful knowing I have a more meaningful connection to it. This is my third draft of this card. He's laughing because he wanted so much to make this really important, note, to his teacher. I hope it finds its way back to you. I hope this card inspires others to pursue their passions. It's physical proof that Carlos's work still lives on with artists like myself. It is my utang, that's a Tagalog word for, what you owe your ancestors or your mentors. It's my utang to you. Thank you. And that's his name. And he's a student at University of San Francisco. And to the Asian Art Museum, he said, please give this to Wofford, make sure she gets it. So I've saved it for her. I told her I have this great note from a student for you. And so next time she comes to the museum, we'll give it to her. But there you see an emotional connection to the artwork, to the exhibit. And by just asking them this simple question, who's an important mentor in your life? We got this outpouring of emotional connection, right? Of people reminding themselves, oh, right, I am connected to someone. I'm not alone, or someone found me worthy of being taken care of.
Yeah. That's so
That is so heartwarming.
Yes.
I put a link to an article on trauma-informed teaching in the chat, which I think is another aspect of this, which is just being ready and having some strategies, coping strategies as a facilitator for when students are tense or maybe rude to each other or rude to one of you, and finding ways to respond appropriately. I think, that's also part of this work too, is just to be trained and ready to not react with that kind of strong reaction, but just with empathy. And there's been a lot of research in recent years of museum spaces about empathy and how museums can be places that generate empathy and support people and having empathetic responses, even in stressful, challenging situations. We share the same struggle. I hope that I think every museum faces this, and there's two issues. One is why are they not coming? What are the barriers for them? Why is it is it lack of awareness, or is there really some reason that it's difficult for them? And we did some research about that. What was the difficulty in coming to our museum? And we found that there are a lot of different barriers, but one that maybe we weren't expecting was something like chaperones. We require that school groups come with one chaperone for every 10 students. And for some schools with both parents working, they didn't have enough chaperones. And so that was like the door shut. Other schools, transportation is a barrier. Other schools, they're too busy with testing or trying to meet other kind of metrics that they have. So I think there's that whole piece of it. And then there's the whole raising awareness. And for us, we had very low awareness at one point. In fact, art teachers, teachers teaching art looked at us as a history museum. They didn't see us as an art museum. But then we started doing the San Francisco Unified School District, which is the public schools in San Francisco. We became the host of their arts festival. And that raised the awareness, 100-fold. Every arts teacher knew about us because we became a platform for them to showcase their students' creativity at the end of the year. And it wasn't just visual art. We had, all of the bands performing and dance and media art. So I think you have to really be creative in creating those connections in maybe unexpected ways. And it takes time and many years, but once you start, there's you can just keep building on it.
Yeah, I think we also have connected with SFUSD, the San Francisco Unified School District, to provide professional development to their teachers. So last year we did a series of 4 virtual workshops just for SFUSD teachers, just to give them ideas that was the first year after the pandemic, they were back on site at school. And so that was a partnership that we found very fruitful because a lot of those teachers have now brought their kids to our museum because they saw us virtually through this program that their arts coordinator created for them. Free professional development, come learn something from the Asian Art Museum. So that helped too. I think if you make things simpler, that helps everybody. So even if, different schools have different needs, if you aim for, like I said before, activities where the instructions are very clear and straightforward and simple, that actually can work for everybody, as I mentioned before. I think it's about saving the teachers time and energy versus giving them specific content that necessarily matches exactly what they're teaching, because the simpler the activity, the easier the teacher can adapt it to their class, can just tweak it so that it fits what they're teaching. So for instance, there was one of those activities at the Chiro Obata workshop we just had that was called I Remember, where we had the teachers just free write, I remember something, I remember my first dance. I remember, the smell of barbecue, on Labor Day weekend or something like that. Just trying to document precious memories. And, we didn't say you had to do it for a certain subject, right? You could do it in art class. You could do it in English class. You could do it in history class. Well, a teacher at that workshop was actually a music teacher who decided she was so interested in Chiro Obata, she wanted to come, even though she didn't teach art, but she wanted to come. And she said she was going to use this I Remember activity to help the students because they had just lost someone in their class. And it was a way for them to process. It was going to be a way they could help each other heal by writing I remember about this person that they lost. And so, that has nothing to do with academic content, but that's what the teacher needed. She's like, this is perfect. I'm going to take this right away and use it with my kids because they need this to help us get through this tough time. And so I think pitching your activities so they're simple and effective, but adaptable is what's going to be successful, where you serve as many teachers as you can.
Yes. Does Deb has anything to add?
Well, and I think this question kind of ties into, the other question about training our, the background that we need to be delivering or facilitating these programs. It's not so much the specific content area, which, Margaret was talking about. It's people who have these skills of facilitation that they know how to connect with people. They know how to get people active on an activity. They know how to encourage close looking at works of art that then can be very rewarding for discussion. So in the same regard, I think developing programs for diverse diverse teachers who actually may have some fear about bringing a group to a museum. They may be worried, will they be successful? Will they know enough? Will they have the skills that they need to feel like they know where to go or how to enter? Or so there might be a lot of things at play with what's holding teachers back. But I think this approach to kind of universal design, let's say borrowing that word from accessibility practices, but thinking broadly about, the Harvard Project Zero thinking routines. You can use them for any work of art from any culture. Sometimes one routine is better for a particular type of art. If it's pictorial or abstract, you might pick a different strategy, but that's why they've got that whole menu of so many different strategies that will give you lots of choices. And some are a little bit more complicated and a little bit more higher functioning in terms of the thinking that's involved. But many of them, like the one Margaret shared, are very simple and straightforward. So we've kind of stepped away from having really, curriculum-driven outcomes. The curriculum is the starting point. It's kind of the entry point. Like, yeah, you have to teach about ancient China. Well, come to the Asian Art Museum, but we're going to make it fun. And we're not going to worry too much that you learn all these dynasty names that were considered part of what we call ancient China. We're not going to worry if you know how bronze was cast exactly, but we want you to have some memories that make you think museums are cool places and I want to go back, because museums really are just a complement to this, long educational career that a person will have through their life. And our goal is to make them feel successful, make them feel like they had a good time, that we didn't bore them, and that they felt they were seen and that their interests were stimulated and nurtured in the experience. So that requires a little bit of letting go of your own objectives as an institution, or maybe even your own knowledge about what's important about your collection. But once you kind of cross that threshold, it's really fun to find these ways to make the museum ever more engaging. And that's, kind of the path that we're on. And we're certainly not the best at it. There are other museums that are doing, I think, a better job. There are museums like the Oakland Museum of California, for example. A lot of science museums and history museums do a really good job of connecting people with active learning to their collection objects.
Activities are part of our guidelines that we write in conjunction with a team of docents who are on a school tours committee, who are often former teachers themselves. So they help us write new guidelines, and the activities are written into the guidelines, set, so that the docents are prepared. They know, what the activities are to help facilitate them instead of having to create them on their own. That said, we provide, I showed you some of the activities that we do. At the end of each tour, we actually provide a range of activities, like 3 activities, and kids can choose which one they want to do. And that gives the students some agency, right? How do I want to express myself? Do I want to make, a paper lotus flower, or do I want to make my, draw a mask? Because right now there's an exhibition on the Asian American artist Bernice Bing, and at the end of our contemporary art tour, the activities relate to Bernice Bing. You can either make a lotus flower, or you can draw the masks that you wear, not the physical masks, but sort of the symbolic masks. How do you hide yourself from society? How are you different when you're with your parents versus with your friends? What mask are you wearing then? Or they can draw an abstract landscape, because Bernice Bing was an abstract expressionist. And so, using pastels, can you draw an abstract, world, basically, where you can't quite tell what it is, in the image, but you can tell it's a landscape. You can tell it's a world, right, that we're entering. And so out of those 3, the kids get to choose the one they want to do. And so that way, it's not dictated to the kids. They have a range, they have a choice, but it's still clear enough to the docents what to expect. But yeah, the Chiro Bada teachers who came, there were history teachers, there were religion teachers, there's a teacher of Buddhism who came. There, like I said, there was a music teacher, a physics teacher came too. I think the earthquake, the idea of the, because Obata documented the big 1906 earthquake, I think that might have been interesting to this person who was a physics teacher. So I think interdisciplinary actually is something we need to think about in the future. There are many ways we could be integrating more science actually into some of our activities. It's something I want to explore. For instance, eventually when our art terrace opens, as we finish our physical transformation of our building, there's going to be this amazing work called Luminous Ground by an artist named Ala Ebtekar. And what he did was he took tiles, he created clay tiles from the earth in the Central Valley of California. He took the ground, he took the earth, made them into tiles. Then he used cyanotype, that sort of imprinting technology where you use the sunlight to imprint an image on the surface. So he imprinted images of the stars, images from the Hubble telescope, onto these tiles to create this gorgeous tile work that shows all these stars, as a portal to the heavens. And it's called Luminous Ground because he took clay from the ground to turn into tiles and used sunlight to make them luminous. And so there's so much you could do science-wise with kids. You could teach them about cyanotype. How does that process work? How does sunlight, imprint an image like that? But even just thinking about the starlight from those images that he took from the Hubble telescope, well, how long did it take for that image to actually come to us? Because those stars are actually millions of miles away, right? And for the light to actually get to us, that took time. And so there could be a lot of great science discussion with that beautiful artwork and a discussion of religion as well, of faith, because his interest in the stars and the heavens comes from his Islamic faith. And he sees mosques and the ceilings of mosques as portals to the heavens. And so he is trying to make a connection between beautiful mosque ceilings that are covered in intricate tiles with these images of the stars in the sky. And so besides talking about art, you could talk about Islamic, beliefs, and you could talk about science. You could talk about time and memory, just the time it took for the light from those stars to get to us is just mind-blowing in a way for kids to think about. So I definitely want to do more interdisciplinary work in the future. I think, we just want to get our docents back on site. So because of the pandemic, quite a few docents, we stopped touring, right? We couldn't tour. And so this year has been, our big job has to get everybody back practicing and doing tours. Hopefully next year, we can do more of that interdisciplinary work, especially once our art terrace opens and that artwork is up.